Alright guys, in this video we'll be looking at solving radical inequalities. The process we're going to go through is a lot like the radical equations. However, we are going to have to take into account the domain of our radical. We need to make sure that underneath that radical we always end up with a positive value. So the very first thing we're going to do is take whatever is underneath that square root, which in our case is 3x plus 5. We need to make sure that that value is positive. So we want to make sure that that number is greater than or equal to a 0. Alright, so this is what I'm going to start with first. 3x plus 5 is greater than or equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and solve this inequality. First thing I'm going to do is subtract 5. And 0 minus 5 is negative 5. Divide by 3. And we find that x is greater than or equal to negative 5/3. Or that's the same thing as x is greater than or equal to negative 1.66 and so on. Alright, so what we're saying here is the x value has to be larger or equal to a negative 5/3. Otherwise we'd end up with a negative number underneath that square root, and we can't have negative underneath the square roots. Alright, so now that we have the domain, now what we need to do is actually solve the inequality itself. So now I'm going to take that square root of 3x plus 5 is greater than or equal to 4. Now remember, this is a lot like our equations. You want to make sure there's nothing outside the radical, which in our case there's not. So I'm going to go ahead and square both sides. So if I square the square root of 3x plus 5, I end up with 3x plus 5. The square root and the square cancel each other out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to square that 4. 4 squared gives us a 16. Trying to get x by itself, so the next thing I'm going to do is come over here and subtract 5. 16 minus 5 gives us 11. And finally I'm going to come over here and divide by 3. And we find out that x is equal to 11/3. Or if we write that as a decimal, that's the same thing as 3.666. Alright, so here's what we know. We know that the x values are greater than or equal to 3.66. We also found out earlier that our domain was negative 1.66. So our answer can be anything that's larger than a negative 1.66. And as you can see from over here, 3.666 is definitely larger than a negative 1.666. Therefore, these are our solutions to our inequality. Again, guys, got to make sure our answers are larger than a negative 1.666. This is the purpose of finding our domain. Alright, let's take a look at another example. We have the inequality 7 plus the square root of negative 4x plus 15 is greater than a 10. First thing we want to do is find that domain. So I'm going to take whatever is underneath the radical, which is a negative 4x plus 15. And we're going to set it greater than or equal to 0. Again, the purpose for this is so that we make sure that whatever value we get, that when we take the square root of it, it's a positive number. Okay? So let's come over here and start by subtracting 15. So 0 minus 15 is a negative 15. The next thing I'm going to do is come and divide by negative 4. And a negative 15 divided by negative 4 gives us a positive 15/4. Now notice that I did divide by negative 4, guys, so we're going to have to flip this inequality symbol around, which now makes it x is less than or equal to positive 15/4, which is the equivalent of x less than or equal to 3.75. Same thing written as a decimal. Alright, so now we know that whatever value or whatever x's we get, they must be less than 3.75. These are the only type of solutions we can have, values that are less than or equal to a 3.75. Alright, so now let's come over here and actually solve this inequality. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that inequality 7 plus the square root of negative 4x plus 15 is greater than 10. First thing we have to do is make sure there's nothing outside the radical, and we do have something outside the radical, and that's the 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by subtracting that 7, making this the square root of negative 4x plus 15 is greater than 10 minus 7, of course, is 3. Alright, now that I've got the square root isolated, the radical, we're now going to go ahead and square both sides. So if I square the square root of negative 4x plus 15, I get a negative 4x plus 15. If I square the 3, I end up with a 9. And I'm going to go ahead and solve this. Subtract 15. And if I subtract 9 minus the 15, I end up with a negative 6. And all that's left for me to do now is divide by negative 4. And a negative 6 divided by negative 4 ends up being a positive 3 over 2. And again, notice that I did divide by negative 4, so I do have to flip my inequality symbol. So I end up with x is less than 3 halves, which is the equivalent of x is less than 1.5. So these are my solutions. Now remember, I did say earlier that our domain, which is right over here, the x values had to be less than or equal to a 3.75. And as you can see from what we have here, these values are definitely less than 3.75. So my solutions to this inequality are x is less than 1.5. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at one more example. We have the square root of 2x plus 3 is less than or equal to 9. Remember, the first thing we're going to do is find that domain. So whatever's underneath your radical, let's go ahead and take that. And let's set it greater than or equal to 0. Remember, the whole idea for doing this is so that we make sure that we end up with values underneath the square root that are positive. Alright, so let's go ahead and start by subtracting 3. 0 minus 3 is negative 3. Now we'll come over here and divide by 2. And we end up with negative 3 over 2, which is the equivalent of negative 1.5. Alright, so we know that our x values have to be some values that are greater than or equal to negative 1.5. Nothing lower or nothing less than negative 1.5 should be a solution to this inequality. Alright, so now that I know the domain, let's go ahead and take the actual inequality. Square root of 2x plus 3 is less than or equal to 9. We're going to actually solve this now. Remember, the first thing we're looking for is to see if there's anything outside the radical, which there's not, which means I can go ahead and go on to the next step, which is to square both sides. So if I square the square root of 2x plus 3, I end up with 2x plus 3. And if I square the 9, I end up with 81. Alright, so now what I need to do is I need to come over here and subtract 3. So 81 minus 3 is 78. Now we can divide by 2. And 78 divided by 2 leaves us with a 39. Alright, so here's the deal. We now know that the x values are less than or equal to 39. But we did have a restriction over here in our domain. We did say earlier that we cannot have any values that are smaller than a negative 1.5. So let's come over here. We know that our values, or x's, are numbers that are less than or equal to 39. But they also have to be larger than a negative 1.5. So I'm going to include the fact that our values have to be greater than or equal to a negative 1.5. So the solutions to this inequality are any values between a negative 1.5 and a positive 39. These are the solutions.